Shin Woo-jin spent 12 years in captivity, locked away in an abandoned warehouse, enduring relentless abuse and forced labor. Deprived of human connection, he survived by devouring books, absorbing vast knowledge, sharpening his mind, and developing an uncanny ability to analyze people and situations with terrifying accuracy. Rescued at the age of 18, Woo-jin struggles to adjust to a world that moved on without him. Though his family welcomes him back with open arms, he remains disconnected, his extraordinary intelligence making the ordinary life he desperately craves seem impossible. His sharp perception draws him into mysteries and dangers he never sought, but something darker lurks within him, waiting to take control. As he navigates university, unexpected friendships, and the haunting echoes of his past, Woo-jin begins to understand that true freedom isn't just about escaping a prison, it's about choosing how to live. But can someone who sees through the world ever truly belong in it? Or will the darkness inside him consume him first? Now let's diving into the story. The story begins with breaking news about the arrest of a man in his 40s for kidnapping and imprisoning a child. The boy was held captive in an old, abandoned warehouse for an unbelievable 12 years. The police have charged the man with kidnapping, imprisonment, and violating labor laws. As they take the accused away, journalists rush in, eager to ask questions. One reporter asks whether the accused knew the victim before. Another asks who first reported the case. The police push through the crowd while journalists demand answers. The victim has hearing and speech impairments, and investigators suspect that the kidnapper knew this beforehand and planned the crime accordingly. When they rescued the boy, the warehouse was filled with books. The police also discovered many injuries on his body, making them believe he has suffered long-term abuse. The victim, identified as 18-year-old Shin Woo-jin, is immediately taken to the hospital where he is now resting. At the hospital, two doctors examine Woo-jin. One doctor explains that he has a severe nutritional imbalance, external wounds with inflammation, and hearing loss. The second doctor looks at the boy, wondering how someone so young and beautiful could have been imprisoned and forced to work for so many years. She takes a deep breath and writes a question on a notebook, asking for his name and whether he can say it out loud. Woo-jin looks at the question. The doctor encourages him to speak. After a moment, he finally responds with words that shock both doctors. He calls himself a son of a bitch. A flashback reveals Woo-jin's life in captivity. He worked on hot summer days while a man watched him. When he finally ate, he devoured his food like an animal. The perpetrator mocked him, calling him disgusting. In the harsh winter, he suffered in the freezing cold, forced to eat insects to survive. Back in the present, the second doctor wonders how much brainwashing Woo-jin has endured to call himself such a horrible name. The countless scars all over his body suggest unimaginable abuse. Whoever did this to him deserves the worst punishment. But despite everything, there is a small relief. His medical test results are not as bad as they feared. She gently places her hand on his shoulder and tells him that it is okay now. He can finally rest as much as he wants. He is safe here. She promises to be right back. As she leaves, she encounters a group of journalists. The hospital guards try to block them, but they keep pushing for answers. They ask about Woo-jin's identity, his condition, and whether his family has been found. They also question his ability to communicate. The doctor gets furious. She cannot believe that these journalists are treating someone's suffering as a source of entertainment. She demands to know how they got inside the hospital. Did the guards even check their IDs? She threatens to report them all for trespassing and obstructing hospital duties. The journalists panic. One of them quickly suggests leaving and going to the crime scene instead. Woo-jin is sleeping, and suddenly he opens his eyes and stares at the ceiling. He notices the fluorescent light above him, and then looks at his own hand. As he sits up, he sees another patient in the room. It is a middle-aged man, busy using his phone. The man glances at him and casually asks if he was kidnapped. He then remarks that life is strange for him too. Woo-jin doesn't respond, trying to observe the man. He quickly assesses his details. His name is Kim Nam-soon, 57 years old, with blood type B. He has an open femur fracture. His height is around 167 centimeters, and he weighs roughly 60 kilograms. His hands are rough and dry, showing signs of frequent dehydration. He is left-handed and doesn't wear any watches or rings, suggesting that he is not interested in accessories and probably has no spouse. Based on all these details, Woo-jin concludes that Kim Nam-soon fell from a low rooftop while doing plastering work. His left-handed brain instinctively made his left foot land first, but the impact caused his femur to fracture and break outward. As he thinks about the best first aid treatment for such an injury, the doctor returns. She gently asks Woo Jin if he slept well and whether he is feeling hungry. She offers him food and gives him a fork and spoon, thinking they will be easier for him to use. Woo Jin silently observes her. He carefully analyzes her face, the wrinkles around her eyes, the way her cheek muscles tighten, and the corners of her mouth rise symmetrically. These small details tell him that she is genuinely smiling at him, offering support. He concludes that she is not a threat. The doctor reassures him that he can eat comfortably now. No one will say anything about the way he eats. Woo Jin looks at the food and immediately starts eating. The doctor and Kim Nam-soon are shocked at his speed. He devours the food so quickly that he begins coughing. The doctor tells him to slow down, warning that he will get indigestion. But Woo Jin doesn't stop until he finishes every last grain of rice. The doctor watches him, stunned. She wonders what kind of life he has been living to make him eat like this. Just then, her phone rings. She answers the call, listens for a moment, then nods. She turns to Woo Jin and tells him that his parents have arrived. Hearing this, Woo Jin repeats the words to himself: father, mother, family. The doctor confirms it and asks if she should bring them in. Then she leaves. Alone in the room, Woo Jin stares at the clock. He begins counting the seconds and then the minutes, measuring how long it will take for his parents to reach him. Suddenly, a voice echoes in his mind. He is about to hear them. His heartbeat quickens. Anxiety creeps in. He senses their presence just outside the door. Outside the room, the doctor speaks with his parents, reminding them that the patient's stability is the top priority. His parents acknowledge the doctor's words. Then they finally enter the room. As the door opens, Woo Jin sees them standing there with the doctor. His father and mother call his name. He stares at them silently. They rush toward him and embrace him tightly. Tears stream down their faces as they apologize over and over again. Woo Jin listens to their words repeating like an echo in his mind. A feeling he cannot explain grips his chest. Then, panic takes over. His parents notice his reaction and grow concerned. They ask him what is wrong, but Woo Jin suddenly starts shouting. The story continues with Woo Jin's younger sister, Bomi. She talks to her mother on the phone and tells her that she has cleaned the house. After ending the call, she reflects on her brother's return and wonders if things will feel awkward. She doesn't remember much about him since she was very young. As she watches a YouTube video about the warehouse where Woo Jin was found, she tries to imagine what it must have been like for him. She realizes that he spent 12 years there, and although she can't fully understand his experience, she thinks it's a relief that he was finally rescued. The doctor informs the family that Woo Jin doesn't have hearing loss, but may be experiencing psychological difficulties. When Bomi notices her parents arriving with her brother, she feels nervous. Her mother calls her name and tells her that she has brought her brother home. Bomi welcomes them, and her mother quickly moves to prepare dinner. Their father calls Woo Jin inside, and as he enters, he silently looks at Bomi. She smiles but hesitates to approach him. As Woo Jin takes in his surroundings, his gaze is fixed on an old childhood photo of him and his sister. His father reassures him that it's understandable to feel awkward after being away for so long. His father then shows him his old room and asks if he remembers it. Woo Jin confirms that he does. His father suggests that he look around the room and spend some time with Bomi. Bomi is shocked by the suggestion, unsure of what to say. Her mother encourages her, saying that she should try to get closer to her brother. At first, Bomi refuses, offering to help with dinner instead. But her mother insists that spending time with Woo Jin is just as important. Eventually, she agrees. While their mother is cooking, Bomi and Woo Jin enter his room. Bomi finds the situation incredibly awkward. Woo Jin observes the furniture, including his bed, the window, and the computer. As he processes his surroundings, he thinks to himself that this is his room. Bomi finally speaks, calling him brother. When Woo Jin turns to her, she suddenly starts crying, realizing that he looks even more handsome than when she last saw him at the hospital. She then takes out a smartphone and offers to teach him how to use it. Sitting together, she explains how to turn it on and how to store important contacts, including their parents' numbers and her own. To help him practice, she deletes her number and asks him to save it again. Woo Jin takes the phone and follows her instructions. When he succeeds, Bomi gets shocked and wonders if he really understood everything so quickly. She tells him that he doesn't have to use formal speech with her since she is his younger sister. Woo Jin acknowledges this and continues listening to her explanations. Bomi then instructs him to turn on the phone. As he does so, he seems amazed by the device. Next, Bomi introduces him to internet search functions. She tells him that he can type anything he wants to know in the search bar and tap the magnifying glass icon. When she asks if he wants to try, Woojin immediately searches for the word family. He looks at the images on the screen, processing the concept of family, his father, his mother, and his sister Bomi. He then softly repeats the word family. Bomi finds his reaction amusing and starts laughing, reassuring him that they are indeed his family. Suddenly, Woojin becomes alert and starts sniffing the air. Bomi watches him curiously as he asks if the scent he is detecting is perfume. He then begins to recall information about the history of perfume, including its origins and uses. He stands up, commenting that the smell is pleasant. Bomi, confused, asks what he just said, but he doesn't answer. Instead, he suddenly leaves the room. Bomi follows him and asks where he is going, but he doesn't respond. He walks straight to the dining table, realizing that the scent he noticed was not perfume but the aroma of freshly cooked food. He seems fascinated and thinks to himself that the dinner smells amazing. His mother, seeing him, happily calls out, saying that he arrived just in time. She asks if he is hungry and invites him to sit down. His father tells him that he made kimchi stew, exaggerating that the taste is so good one could die without realizing it. Confused by the phrase, Woojin asks if he can eat it. His father laughs and clarifies that he didn't mean it literally. The family then fills his plate and serves him food, feeding him with their own hands. Together, they enjoy the meal. The scene shifts to a police interrogation room, where an accused man is being questioned. The police officer states that the man's family members have all died over the past 5 years, one person per year. He asks the suspect if he has anything to say about this. The first victim was the man's wife, followed by his mother. Later, his sister-in-law died after consuming poisonous herbs. Even 2 people in his neighborhood mysteriously lost their lives. The officer accuses the man, saying that all these deaths were linked to him. The suspect, growing furious, insists that he is innocent. The officer presses him further, raising his voice and accusing him of organizing these deaths. The suspect, desperate, suddenly shouts that someone else might have been responsible. The officer, now intrigued, demands to know what he means. The suspect then yells that the person he had once fed and sheltered is the true culprit. He insists that it was all that person's doing. The officer, losing patience, scolds him for yelling. The suspect, still agitated, swears that he has no idea what kind of person that bastard really is. He claims that everything that happened was because of him. Late at night, Woojin sits in his room staring at the YouTube icon on his phone. He remembers Bomi telling him that many people watch videos on YouTube. Curious, he opens the app and feels amazed by the huge variety of content available. He scrolls through different videos and listens to people speaking. As he hears them talk, he starts repeating their words. He practices saying phrases like, "Hello, everyone," and "Hello, family," trying to match their pronunciation. Then, he comes across a video titled Tteokbokki Mukbang. He clicks on it and watches 2 girls eating spicy rice cakes. One of the girls greets the audience and says she has been craving tteokbokki for a week. She takes a bite and praises the taste, calling it seriously amazing and absolutely delicious. Woojin's eyes widen, and his mouth fills with water as he suddenly craves the food. He wants to eat it right away. Suddenly, he hears a knock on his door. His sister, Bomi, stands outside and asks if she can come in. Woojin gets up, opens the door, and sees her waiting. He asks if she called him and if she needs him to do something. Bomi becomes curious about what he is doing. Woojin wonders if she needs help with cleaning or some other work. He asks what kind of task she wants him to do. Bomi quickly tells him that it is not about work and that he doesn't have to clean anything. She then asks if he wants to go out for ice cream. Woojin gets astonished. He asks about ice cream, and Bomi confirms, explaining that it is cold and really delicious. She assumes that, as expected, he has never had it before. She grabs his hand and tells him they should go. Their mother reminds them that they cannot go anywhere else. But their father tells Bomi to hold her brother's hand tightly. Both siblings say they will be back soon and leave the house. They arrive at an ice cream shop, and Woojin looks around in shock. Everything inside the store amazes him. Bomi calls him over and tells him to choose any ice cream he likes. Woojin stares at the colorful options, feeling confused. He lets out a small "wow" in amazement. Seeing his hesitation, Bomi offers to help. After thinking for a moment, she picks an ice cream and hands it to him. While paying for their treats, she considers giving him money to let him try paying himself. However, she decides it is better to take things slowly. She tells Wu Jin to give his ice cream to her so she can handle the payment. As they leave the store, a group of girls sitting nearby notices Wu Jin. One of them urges her friend and tells her to look at him. The others also turn their attention toward him. Meanwhile, Bomi teaches Wu Jin how to open the ice cream wrapper. The girls continue to watch him. One of them finds him handsome and suggests asking for his number, but her friend stops her, saying it would be too embarrassing. They also notice Bomi standing beside him and wonder if she is his girlfriend. Bomi takes the ice cream from Wu Jin and opens it for him. She hands it back, telling him to try it because it is super cool and sweet. Wu Jin takes a bite and freezes for a moment. Bomi watches him closely and becomes curious. She asks if something is wrong. She wonders if the ice cream tastes strange or if it is too cold for him. She starts thinking that maybe she should have bought something else instead. She quickly reassures him that he doesn't have to eat it if he doesn't like it. Wu Jin looks at her and tells her that the ice cream is delicious. As he eats, he suddenly becomes emotional. He continues taking bites, enjoying the sweet taste. Bomi notices and asks where he learned the word delicious. The girls sitting nearby continue to watch in surprise. Bomi reminds Wu Jin to eat slowly and asks again if he likes the ice cream. While enjoying their dessert, Bomi suggests taking a picture together. They take several selfies and decide to head back home. Bomi feels satisfied, thinking the outing turned out well. As they approach their house, Bomi becomes busy on her phone. She sends their selfies to a group chat and starts reading the comments. Suddenly, Wu Jin stops walking. He notices a strange man standing in the distance. As Bomi takes a turn on the road and Wu Jin is looking at the strange man, the man becomes agitated. Wu Jin observes the man closely. He notices the brim of the man's hat has multiple marks on it. His expression changes as he focuses on the details. His eyebrows lower, his eyelids stretch tight, and his pupils dilate. He recalls that when they left home earlier, their family didn't recognize this man. This means the stranger doesn't belong to their neighborhood. As the man makes eye contact with Wu Jin, he suddenly looks terrified. His face changes, and he quickly decides to leave. Wu Jin continues watching him closely. He notices that the man's armpits are soaked with sweat, and that the knees of his pants are creased. His shoes have pedal marks, but they are too narrow to be from a bicycle. They look more like they came from a motorcycle. There is no muddy area nearby, yet dirt clings to his shoes. Wu Jin realizes that the man must have come from somewhere else. After processing all this, Wu Jin calls his sister. Bomi turns around and asks why he is just standing there. She wonders if something is wrong. Wu Jin looks at her and firmly tells her to go inside the house first. Bomi becomes curious and asks him if something is wrong. She worries about going inside alone because their mother will scold her. It is too late, and she doesn't want to leave him alone outside. Their mother said she would wait, so she tells Wu Jin they should go home together. After some hesitation, Wu Jin agrees and follows Bomi home. The street lights turn off, making the night even darker. Inside his room, Wu Jin stands near the window watching outside. His inner monster speaks to him, telling him that he must stay out of things if he wants to protect his family. But Wu Jin insists that it is his family and his responsibility. The inner monster mocks him, asking if calling the police is how he plans to protect his loved ones. It calls him a fool. Wu Jin believes there are many ways to protect them and refuses to listen. The inner monster reminds him that he did what he had to do in order to survive, saying that someone like him would have died long ago. But Wu Jin argues that he could have survived on his own, and that the monster should not exist in this world. The inner monster questions him, asking if he is calling it a monster, then what does that make him? It challenges Wu Jin, asking if he is truly better than it at anything. Wu Jin asserts that he is the master of his own body and that the monster is just another persona he created. The monster laughs and claims the opposite, saying that this is its body, not Wu Jin's. Wu Jin remains firm. He understands that worry and anxiety feed the monster, and whenever he feels those emotions, the monster consumes him. But now, he has gained control. If he can summon it from his subconscious, he can use its knowledge and abilities to his advantage. Closing his eyes, Wu Jin calls out to the monster, inviting it to appear. When he opens his eyes, he stretches his body. Looking outside, he notices the strange man standing in the rain, holding an umbrella. Wu Jin smiles and leaves his room. He steps outside and walks toward the man. The man turns around, but Wu Jin silently passes by him. He lifts his hand to catch the raindrops and reflects on how rain can even conceal human presence. He hints that he has been waiting for a day like this. The man, curious, asks him what he means, but Wu Jin responds playfully, telling him not to be boring. The man asks who he is. Wu Jin smiles, acting hurt that the man doesn't recognize him. He describes the man's day in detail, mentioning that he had jjajangmyeon for lunch and works as a delivery person. He even mentions how the man tirelessly rides his motorcycle over hills. The man becomes intrigued but also uneasy. Wu Jin continues, mentioning how the man has been lurking around their villa and how there is only cat hair on his sleeves. He then accuses the man of killing a stray cat for practice. The man becomes terrified and demands to know who Wu Jin really is. Without answering, Wu Jin suddenly attacks. The man falls to the ground crying and trembling in fear. Wu Jin rips open his shirt, revealing his scarred chest. The man stares in astonishment. Stepping closer, Wu Jin warns him not to appear in front of him again. If he does, he will carve the same wounds into his body. He tells the man to stop crawling like a worm and leave quickly. The man crawls to his feet and runs away. Left alone, Wu Jin looks up at the sky, feeling the rain on his face. He smiles and listens to the soothing sound of the rain. Days pass. One evening, Wu Jin sits at the dinner table with his parents and Bomi. They share a warm meal together, enjoying each other's company like a real family. The next day, he goes out with his mother. They try new food and go shopping. The following day, he spends time with Bomi, going to the movies and trying popcorn for the first time. On the fourth day, Wu Jin stays in his room, studying. Bomi watches him curiously as he solves problems at an incredible speed. She tells him he should read the questions before answering instead of just guessing. But Wu Jin assures her that he has read them all. Bomi wonders where he learned to talk like that and regrets teaching him about YouTube. She checks his answers and finds that they all seem correct. Doubting her own judgment, she gives him another notebook to try. Wu Jin solves every problem quickly. Bomi watches in shock, realizing that all his answers are correct. She tells him that he is like a genius. But Wu Jin disagrees. He doesn't want to be special. He wants to be ordinary. Bomi is surprised and asks if he really wishes to be just an ordinary person. Wu Jin confirms it, saying that it might be difficult, but he wants to be normal. Bomi thinks about how, at her age, or even younger, Wu Jin must have suffered. She imagines him being beaten and held captive. Tears well up in her eyes as she realizes everything he has been through. Observing her closely, Wu Jin notices the subtle changes in her expression. Her eyes slightly lowering, her corrugator muscles tightening, her eyelids relaxing, and the corners of her mouth drooping. He gently places his hand on her head and tells her not to be sad. Then, he starts writing something on a notebook. Bomi watches him curiously and asks what he is doing. When he finishes, he shows her the note. Bomi looks at it and, as soon as she understands what he has written, her eyes widen in shock. Wu Jin writes a note for Bomi. He tells her not to be sad because sadness can weaken the immune system, increase stress, and cause health problems like weight gain and cardiovascular disease. Sadness also affects the brain, making people feel tired and lowering serotonin levels, which can lead to depression and anxiety. Bomi reads the note and feels amazed. She asks him how he knows all this. He replies that he has read many books. Their mother calls them for dinner, and Wu Jin runs to eat. Bomi, still looking at the note, feels surprised, but their mother calls her again, so she quickly joins them. Later that night, Wu Jin watches YouTube food reviews. People in the videos say the food is really delicious. He scrolls through different videos, amazed by how many food-related videos exist. He clicks on one, where a girl introduces malatong. She says she has already eaten earlier, so she will have a modest amount, 10 servings. She starts with flat glass noodles, ordering a spicy flavor. It is extremely spicy, but she still enjoys it. She then tries cone noodles and loves the texture. Wu Jin keeps scrolling and finds more videos of the same girl eating different foods. He clicks on another video where she does a ramen mukbang. She starts by boiling water. Before eating, she adjusts her hair. Then, she begins eating and continues talking about the food. As Wu Jin watches the videos, he wonders about the girl. He believes the girl is behaving just like him. He thinks about how someone like him might react the same way to food. He remembers a conversation with his parents. His father once asked him what he wanted to be in the future, but his mother said he didn't have to decide yet. She just wanted him to be happy and healthy. Wu Jin answered that he wanted to be an ordinary person with an ordinary job. His father agreed and said that would be good. Later, Wu Jin arrives at a building. He observes a situation where two men argue. One man accuses the other of a crime, saying the CCTV caught him, but the other man denies it. He insists that he was not there and doesn't even own the hat seen in the footage. The accuser, growing frustrated, points out that there is an eyewitness. The accused still denies it, saying it is impossible because he was never there. Woo-jin approaches them and greets Detective Kim Tae-hyun. Tae-hyun is shocked to see him and barely recognizes him. He says Woo-jin has grown handsome and asks how he has been. A flashback shows Tae-hyun rescuing Woo-jin in the past, taking him to an ambulance and promising to take responsibility for his safety. Back in the present, Woo-jin thanks Tae-hyun, saying he has been doing well because of him. Tae-hyun, happy to see him healthy, orders his colleague Gicheol to take the suspect to a holding cell. The man continues to insist that he is innocent. Woo-jin watches the scene and asks Tae-hyun if suspects always deny their crimes at first. Tae-hyun laughs and says that is true. It happens as if there is a manual for it. He then asks why Woo-jin is there. Did he come because he missed him? Woo-jin says he has something to show him. Tae-hyun becomes curious and asks what it is. He suggests they get a drink and talk outside, but Woo-jin insists that he look at something immediately. Tae-hyun looks at the phone screen and sees a mukbang video. He asks why Woo-jin is showing him a food video. Did he start a YouTube channel? Woo-jin explains that the girl in the video was once in a situation similar to his. He analyzes her body language. Her eyes look up and to the right, which indicates lying. Her fingers move toward her lips, a sign of nervousness or anxiety. She bites her lip as if she is chewing on it, which is another sign of nervousness. Feeling anxious while eating delicious food seems strange. If she were only worried about the taste, she wouldn't show this level of anxiety. Her eyes dart to the right again. She says the food is delicious, but her body language suggests otherwise. While eating, her shoulders are hunched. This posture appears when someone feels threatened or attacked. The limbic system makes people curl up in self-defense. Then, her eyes look up and to the left. This movement means she is recalling a memory. At the same time, she covers her mouth with her hand, a sign that she is hiding something. This is often an unconscious reaction when people don't want to talk about something. While boiling water, she fiddles with her necklace, a common action for stress relief or psychological stability. Tae-hyun listens and asks what Woo-jin is trying to say. Woo-jin points out something important. The girl is sending a signal. Her fingers form letters spelling out SOS. He explains that micro-expressions and unconscious actions all add up. It is too perfect to be a coincidence. This girl is being held captive just like he was before. Tae-hyun, still unsure, questions if that is really the case. Woo-jin insists. He points out that at first only small signs appeared. A barely visible hair, then a hair tie, then cotton. The girl is getting braver in sending signals. Tae-hyun processes the information and realizes that the victim is likely in her early 20s. She might not have a family or could have grown up in a poor environment. Woo-jin says the perpetrators are likely multiple people, ranging from teenagers to young adults. Most likely the leader of the group is in his 20s and probably didn't finish middle school. Tae-hyun questions if he knows the person who was held captive. Woo-jin says no. He was also locked up for a long time, so he understands how captive people behave. Then, he asks if coincidences can become the truth when they pile up. Tae-hyun gets confused. Woo-jin points out that the outfit Tae-hyun is wearing was bought by his mother. Tae-hyun gets shocked and asks how he knows that. Woo-jin says this is just one coincidence. The suspect earlier that got taken away, for example. The culprit likely plays the violin or viola as a hobby. Tae-hyun reacts, surprised that the suspect plays an instrument. Woo-jin explains that if he is right, that would be the second coincidence. Tae-hyun asks if he wants to be a profiler or something. Woo-jin says no, he just wants to be an ordinary office worker and comes to file a report. He is only trying to explain his reasoning. He then suggests that Tae-hyun ask the suspect in the holding cell what his hobby is. If he is wrong, Tae-hyun can punish him for obstructing official duties. Tae-hyun agrees since they already have a connection, then leaves, wondering what he is doing. Then, he approaches the suspect in the cell and asks if he happens to play the violin or viola. The man looks curious, then admits that he does, as a hobby. Tae-hyun gets shocked and wonders if Woo-jin has some kind of special ability. A flashback shows Woo-jin observing the suspect earlier. He had closely examined the man's fingers and realized he played violin or viola. Back in the present, Tae-hyun returns to where Woo-jin was, but he is gone. Gicheol informs he doesn't know where Woo-jin went. Tae-hyun notices a note on his desk. It says, "Two coincidences. Shall they try for a third?" The high school mukbang girl is desperate now. The note also mentions Woojin's phone number. Taehyun tells Gichul to search YouTube for high school mukbang. Gichul acknowledges his order. Meanwhile, Woojin waits at a bus stop. The bus arrives, and his mother reminds him to get his transit card ready. He boards the bus as a student and takes the window seat. A flashback shows him drinking with his father and uncle. His uncle asks if he really wants to be an office worker. Woojin confirms that he does, just like at his uncle's company. His uncle laughs, and his father comments that the company is not exactly ordinary. His uncle says he heard Woojin is great at studying, solving problems in seconds, so for him, it would be an ordinary job. Woojin asks if he can visit the company. His uncle agrees and asks when he wants to come. Back in the present, Woojin sits on the bus, thinking about the promise. Today is the day he is scheduled to visit. He has 4 stops left, about 32 minutes to arrive. After some time, he reaches his uncle's office and calls him, saying he has arrived. Woojin looks up at the large office building and reads the sign, Shinhwa General Trading. It is a major corporation, just as he expected. He observes the people around him, thinking about his dream of living an ordinary life. His uncle arrives and greets him, asking why he waited outside instead of in the lobby. Woojin is grateful for allowing the tour. As they walk inside, his uncle explains that there is a large office in the basement, and this building is the headquarters. They also have branch offices in different locations. Woojin names all the branches, and his uncle gets astonished. He asks if Woojin looked them up before coming. Woojin says yes, he thinks he needs to know a lot to live an ordinary life. But now, he realizes that living an ordinary life is actually difficult. His uncle praises him for being clever, then leads him to the entrance. As they wait for the elevator, a girl approaches and asks if Woojin is the manager's son. His uncle recognizes her and calls her Hyerim. He clarifies that Woojin is his nephew and is only visiting. Hyerim glances at Woojin and finally asks if he is in high school. Woojin asks the same about her. Hyerim gets confused, can't he tell from her uniform? The elevator arrives and his uncle quickly interrupts their conversation, saying goodbye to Hiram and taking Woojin with him. They arrive at the 7th floor, and his uncle leads him inside. Woojin is amazed to see the office. He walks around, watching employees work. His uncle lets him sit in a cubicle and asks how it feels. Woojin says it doesn't feel real yet, but he will work hard to become a real office worker someday. Just then, an employee approaches his uncle and informs him that the Saudi contract was canceled. His uncle gets angry and says they should have set up a meeting first in the conference room. His uncle apologizes to Woojin, saying he had planned to have lunch with him in the cafeteria, but now he has urgent business. Woojin says it is okay. He has already seen a lot. He thanks his uncle and decides to leave on his own. Back on the 1st floor, he sees Hiram again. She notices him too and says they meet again. Woojin checks the time. It is 11 a.m., not a time for a high school student to be here. He observes her. She doesn't seem intimidated when dealing with adults. Her expression remains calm, and she moves confidently, controlling the space around her. Hiram asks if he received what the manager passed on. Woojin analyzes her body language. The way she blocks his path suggests she is related to a high-ranking company executive. It would not hurt to confirm. He responds that he got it, then starts walking away. Hiram gets annoyed and calls after him. Woojin turns back and Hiram asks if he is skipping school. Woojin replies that he doesn't go to school. Hiram gets astonished and asks what he means. Woojin repeats that he doesn't attend school and tries to leave again. She stops him, questioning why he keeps ignoring people. Woojin replies that he doesn't want to waste time on things that don't benefit him, like this conversation. He doesn't think he will gain anything from talking to her. Hiram gets shocked by his words. Woojin thinks, people deny and undervalue others to prove their own worth. Now, he wants to see who she really is. Hiram then asks, what if she is the daughter of the company's CEO? Woojin knows that in situations like this, he needs to show an expression. He slightly widens his eyes and opens his mouth a bit to react. Hiram asks if it changes how he sees her now. Woojin thinks after revealing her identity, she looks at him like a superior talking to a subordinate, unaware of how rude she is being. But she quickly regains control of her excitement. Hiram asks why Woojin is not in school. Woojin replies that he isn't attending school. Hiram finds it perfect because she is bored and invites him to hang out. Woojin notices her body language. Her pupils dilate and shift to the upper right. The corners of her eyes droop slightly, and her mouth curls into a mocking smile. He realizes that she sees him as a plaything, but he thinks he can use that to his advantage. He realizes she is not giving him a choice and agrees. He thinks that if she grows up, she will likely become either a sociopath or a narcissist. Hiram tells him she knows a good place, and when Woo Jin asks where it is, she doesn't give him the location, expecting him to follow without question. Woo Jin thinks about how she expects the world to revolve around her. After that, they reach a cafe. Hiram asks if he is trying to become an idol since he isn't in school. Woo Jin explains that he is studying for a high school equivalency exam. He asks why Hiram isn't in school. She says she left early because it is that time of the month. He observes her eyes moving to the upper left, a sign of possible lying. She also flips her hair, an unconscious stress relief habit, which makes him suspect she isn't telling the truth. Woo Jin responds by thinking about the biological process of the uterine lining, shedding due to hormones. Hiram hesitates and asks what he is talking about. At that moment, the waitress arrives and asks if they are ready to order. Hiram looks annoyed and orders the S-course for both of them without asking him. Woo Jin notices that she once again doesn't give him a choice and realizes she has a strong desire to dominate others. Hiram then asks for his name. Woo Jin introduces himself, and she comments that it's not a bad name before introducing herself. Then she asks if Woo Jin is always this quiet. He replies that he is. The waitress returns with their soup, and Hiram complains that it is boring. Suddenly, she gets scared, and the waitress apologizes. Hiram says it is fine. After the waitress leaves, Woo Jin asks if she is sensitive since nothing really happened. She reminds him that it is that time of the month. As she ties her hair tie falls to the floor. Woo Jin gets up to help her. She questions what he is doing, and he says he is protecting her head from injury. She suddenly becomes self-conscious. Woo Jin thinks that something bad must have happened to her in the past. Hiram panics and denies it, asking what makes him think he knows anything. Woo Jin simply says she looks a bit tired. Hiram tells him to worry about himself instead, saying that his face is so pale. She then encourages him to eat before the food gets cold. He agrees and starts eating. As he tastes the food, he finds it delicious. Hiram watches his reaction and says the soup here is as good as the one at a restaurant in Busan. Woo Jin realizes he has found something useful and decides to backtrack the conversation. He asks who she went to the restaurant with. Instead of answering, Hiram asks if he knows Kim Yena. Woo Jin doesn't recognize the name. She tells him that she is an actress and questions if he lives under a rock. Woo Jin changes the topic by mentioning that Hiram must have enjoyed seeing the ocean. Hiram's mood brightens, and she excitedly describes the fireworks over Gwangan Bridge, comparing them to a painting. Woo Jin observes that her brain and body are likely flooded with pleasure-inducing hormones as she recalls the moment. Woo Jin knows that the brain cannot tell the difference between reality and imagination. Just like thinking of a lemon makes a person salivate, recalling a joyful memory brings back the same emotions. By guiding her through happy memories and listening, he realizes he has become a source of pleasure for her. Their conversation continues as she describes heart-shaped fireworks. He listens, making her talk more. The waitress returns with their main dishes. Woo Jin gets excited about the food, and Hiram feels awkward watching him. She asks if he has ever been on a trip. Woo Jin says no. Hiram tells him he should definitely travel and mentions that she went to Holbox Island last year. Woo Jin immediately states the exact location of the island in Mexico. Hiram confirms he is right and describes the beauty of the place. Suddenly, Woo Jin stands up and says he has to go study. Hiram is shocked and asks if he is serious about studying all of a sudden. He reminds her that he is preparing for the high school equivalency exam and says goodbye. Hiram tries to stop him, asking for his phone number. She offers to help him when he travels to Holbox in the future, saying she knows the best hotels and restaurants. Woo Jin realizes that she is addicted to the pleasure hormones he triggers. He suspects she has attachment issues and weak family bonds. Woo Jin hands Hiram his phone so she can input her number. She is shocked that he doesn't even have a passcode. After she saves her number, he thanks her for the meal and leaves. Hiram follows him outside and asks where Woo Jin lives, but he doesn't answer. Just then, he notices a crime. A man is being attacked. Hiram asks what is wrong with him. Woo Jin tells her not to look because someone has been stabbed. When the perpetrator hears this, he runs away. Instead of chasing him, Woo Jin rushes to the injured man. He thinks about how difficult it is to live an ordinary life. He places his hand on the man's wound and calls for help, urgently reporting the stabbing. He provides the location in front of a restaurant and realizes the injured man's pulse is rising rapidly due to blood loss. He asks for the man's blood type. The man weakly replies that it is type B. Woo Jin informs the emergency responders that the man has an abdominal stab wound and severe internal bleeding. A blood transfusion is needed urgently. The person on the other end asks him to repeat. and Woo Jin does so. They instruct him to lay the man flat and apply pressure to the wound, but he is already doing that. He demands that they prepare type B blood and send help immediately. Hiram watches the entire scene in shock. Meanwhile, Woo Jin thinks once again about how difficult it is to live an ordinary life. The ambulance arrives with the police. Woo Jin cleans his hands with a cloth. The police officer wants to ask him a few questions. He describes the suspect in detail, mentioning the short hair, gray hat, black-collared t-shirt, blue jeans, and height and weight. The officer asks him to start from the beginning again. Woo Jin repeats everything. The police officer thanks him and asks for his contact number. Hiram watches him from a distance. The officer tells him they will stay in touch. Woo Jin agrees. He thinks this must be Hiram's first time experiencing something like this. He compares her reaction to a child taking their first steps, trying but eventually falling. When a baby falls, parents comfort them. Right now, he can be that person for Hiram. Woo Jin walks up to Hiram and asks if she is shocked. He tells her everything is okay. He believes this will become a strong memory for her, and she will think of him. Hiram, feeling curious, says, yes, she is shocked. Woo Jin reassures her, saying the victim is not badly hurt and she doesn't need to worry. He reminds her that there are many CCTVs around and the culprit didn't even see their faces. The police will probably catch him soon. Hiram nods and agrees. That night, Hiram is at home, taking a bath. She keeps thinking about the incident. She remembers Woo Jin telling her not to look, saying the victim is not badly hurt, and telling her not to worry. She thinks about how he comforted her. After finishing her bath, she sits in front of the mirror and looks at herself. Then, she realizes she didn't get to ask Woo Jin something. Meanwhile, Woo Jin is in his room watching food videos on YouTube. He wonders if MSG is really the seasoning of gods and thinks the food looks delicious. He decides he will try it someday. Just then, he gets a message from Hiram. She asks if he got home safely and if he's okay. Woo Jin replies, saying he is totally fine. Hiram asks what he means. Woo Jin tells her he is going to bed now and says goodnight. Then, he goes back to watching food videos. A little later, Hiram messages him again, saying it's only 10 o'clock, and she is surprised he is already going to sleep. But this time, Woo Jin ignores her message and continues watching his videos. The next morning, he has breakfast with his family. He enjoys the food, and his mother feels happy seeing him eat so well. After breakfast, he studies in his room and completes all his work. He checks his phone and reminds himself that keeping it beside him is the golden rule for maintaining an ordinary daily life. He gets a message from Hiram, but decides to ignore it. He tells himself that ignoring messages is also part of an ordinary life. He looks out the window and sees a sparrow. He thinks about how peaceful and ordinary his life is. He believes that because being ordinary is difficult, he must work hard at it. Just then, Woo Jin receives a phone call. He answers, saying hello. The person on the other side introduces themselves as Kim Mi-young from XX Capital. They talk about business funds and emergency loans. Woo Jin suddenly becomes alert, thinking he might have won something. He asks if he can get 10 million won. The caller sounds astonished and asks what he means. Woo Jin raises the number to 10 billion won, feeling confident that he knows how to handle the situation. Then, he receives another phone call. He answers, and the caller introduces himself as Officer Lee Sang-chul from XX Police Station. Woo Jin immediately wonders if he has won again. The officer asks if he is the student who reported the stabbing near XX. Woo Jin confirms. The officer asks if he is okay, saying it must have been a shocking experience. Woo Jin replies that he is fine. The officer then tells him that the suspect has been caught, and they need him to come in for a witness statement. Woo Jin leaves his room and tells his family he will be back soon. He thinks about how, unlike in childhood, he will not return home late this time. He will come back on time every day. After that, he reaches the police station. In the interrogation room, he tells the detective that he could not see the suspect's face well because of the hat. He says he focused on the overall impression instead. The detective asks if the suspect seems like the person from that time. Instead of answering immediately, Woo Jin asks what the suspect is saying now. The detective asks if he wants to hear his voice. The suspect is frustrated and tells the police that they are harassing innocent people. He insists he didn't do anything. Woo Jin observes the suspect's face closely while listening. The suspect claims he doesn't even know the victim, so why would he attack them? He asks why he would ever do such a thing. He points to the blood on his hands and argues that he got hurt while cooking. He shows his hands covered in small cuts and sarcastically asks if it is now a crime to be bad at cooking. Woojin gets shocked after hearing this. The detective asks what he thinks. After a moment, Woojin says that the suspect is lying. The detective asks Woojin if he thinks the suspect is the culprit. Woojin confidently says yes. The suspect tries to defend himself, saying he was just walking around the neighborhood. But Woojin carefully observes his body language. He notices that the suspect frequently touches his nose, which is a common sign of lying. When people lie, their bodies release catecholamines, which increase blood pressure around the nose and eyes, causing itchiness. He also sees the suspect chewing his lips and touching them with his hands. These unconscious actions often indicate regret and a desire to take back a lie. Woojin recalls that people react to danger in 3 ways: freezing, fleeing, or fighting. He notices that the suspect freezes by crossing his feet, which could mean he feels psychologically pressured. Even if he is innocent, he might freeze due to stress. But when analyzing his overall behavior mathematically and probabilistically, his body language shows fear of being exposed. Woojin asks about the suspect's educational background. The detective gets confused and tells Woojin that the suspect has a master's degree. Woojin thinks that highly educated people value logical evidence. If the suspect is guilty, he would worry about DNA, witnesses, or other proof against him. Woojin asks if they mentioned an eyewitness. The detective says not yet. He also confirms that Woojin only saw the suspect from a distance. Woojin suggests that if they tell the suspect there is an eyewitness, he will likely confess. He firmly believes the suspect is the culprit. Before leaving, the detective asks if Woojin needs him to walk him out, but Woojin declines. After he leaves, the detective enters the interrogation room and tells accused named Kim Youngbae that they have an eyewitness who saw him at the scene. The suspect is visibly shocked and asks about the eyewitness. The detective asks if he admits to the crime now. The suspect finally confesses, saying it was impulsive. Meanwhile, outside the station, Woojin remembers people eating food. He wonders what jjajangmyeon tastes like at the police station. He imagines it being incredibly delicious and thinks that he will definitely try it someday. He then checks his phone and receives a message from Hiram. She asks what he is doing. Woojin replies that the culprit has been caught, so she can relax now. At that moment, Hiram is sitting in her school cafe with her friends. But Hiram is too focused on her conversation with Woojin. She asks why he is only contacting her now. He simply tells her to get home safely. Hiram gets shocked and furious, finding his response unbelievable. Woojin casually thinks that people usually just read messages and ignore them. Hiram gets intrigued and asks how he knows that. She also asks what he is doing now. Woojin says he is taking on a challenge. She asks what kind of challenge, and he tells her that if she comes, it might increase his chances of success. Later, Woojin and Hiram go to a restaurant to take on a food challenge. Hiram is still annoyed about his earlier messages. The waiter explains the challenge. They must finish all the food within 20 minutes. If they fail or throw up, they will have to pay a 2,001 penalty. Woojin is determined to win. He thinks about how there is no set maximum amount of food. It keeps increasing. The real challenge is dealing with leptin, the hormone that signals fullness to the brain. Fat cells release leptin when eating, so he must finish before his brain registers that he is full. The waiter asks if they are ready. Woojin confidently says yes, and the challenge begins. He starts eating at an incredible speed, shocking both Hiram and the waiter. He continues to eat rapidly and finishes his bowl. Hiram, still in shock, doesn't finish hers. The waiter announces that Woojin wins. Woojin thinks about asking Bomi to praise him. Hiram is shocked and asks if he is trying to become a YouTuber. She finds it crazy that he ate so much so quickly. She questions if he is even human, since eating like that doesn't seem normal. After leaving the restaurant, Hiram comments that the place was great and thanks Woojin for the meal. She asks if they still have room for more food. Woojin replies that it is a rule to have dessert after a meal when dining with a woman. Hiram thinks he is weird but also strangely interesting. Woojin asks if that is not normal. He tells her to come quickly, and they go to another cafe for dessert. He finds the sweets delicious. Hiram tells him he needs to stop watching YouTube because his way of speaking is unusual. But Woojin continues enjoying his dessert, repeating how tasty it is. Hiram silently watches him, feeling a bit awkward. In the evening, Hiram's driver arrives to pick her up. She tells Woojin again that he needs to stop watching YouTube. His way of speaking is strange, almost like he is copying the phrases he hears. She offers him a ride home, but he refuses and leaves on his own. As she watches him walk away, she smiles, finding him peculiar yet interesting. Later that night, Woojin is in his room watching a YouTube video. He repeats the words from the video as if practicing them. Suddenly, he receives a phone call and wonders if he won something at this late hour. He answers the call, and the person on the other end asks if he is Woojin. He confirms his identity and asks who is calling. The caller is Detective Taehyun. Taehyun asks if it is a good time to talk. He then mentions the YouTube channel Woojin told him about, the high school mukbang channel, where a student ate 10 servings of malatang. He reveals that there was not just one perpetrator but several. The victims and perpetrators met in a group of runaway youths. The victims' families didn't look for them much since they frequently ran away. One of the victims, who turned 20 after years of running away, appeared on YouTube while being held captive, but no one suspected anything because of their history. Woojin realizes that the runaway group likely committed the crime. Knowing this, Taehyun tells him that his tip saved someone's life and asks how he figured it out. Woojin asks if the victim has returned home safely. Taehyun confirms that they did. He thanks Woojin for helping solve the case and offers to treat him to a meal as a thanks. Woojin sees this as an opportunity and suggests they meet instead of just having rice. Taehyun agrees and asks what he would like to eat. Without hesitation, Woojin requests 2-horned Hanwoo grade 9. Taehyun becomes curious when Woojin mentions Hanwoo beef. He misunderstands and asks if it's tukbegi bulgogi, but Woojin corrects him, saying it's Hanwoo grade number 9 salchisal. Taehyun is confused by the term 2-horn, and when he hears number 9, he misinterprets it. Eventually, he agrees, excited to try the premium beef. Taehyun asks when they should meet, and they decide on Saturday. On the day of their meeting, Woojin walks outside, looking forward to finally eating the high-quality Hanwoo beef. While walking, a boy and a girl approach him. The girl apologizes for stopping him, and the boy asks if they can talk. The girl says he has a lot of good fortune on his face. Woojin is confused and asks what she means by fortune. She explains that she means luck or good fortune. She adds that they are students and that his energy is so bright they couldn't just walk past him. Woojin thinks about the different types of study and lifelong learning. He asks them what kind of study they are talking about. The girl says they mainly study the principles of all things. Woojin finds this interesting and asks if it can be considered a science like physics. The two students become awkward. The girl explains that it's not the same as physics, giving an example. People don't see mountains and water as they naturally are, but assign meaning to them. Woojin responds by explaining mountains scientifically as high-altitude tree formations and water as H2O, composed of hydrogen and oxygen. He asks if there is any mistake in his knowledge. The girl praises him, saying his bright energy must make his insight extraordinary. The boy suddenly asks if people often tell him he is handsome. Then, he mentions that Woojin resembles his ancestor who is sitting on his shoulder. He says Woojin's ancestor has been watching over him but looks slightly displeased because he hasn't been very pious. Woojin looks around, trying to see the spirit, and asks if it's a ghost. The boy gets astonished, and the girl corrects him, saying they don't call them ghosts, but ancestral spirits. Woojin asks how she perceives such non-organic entities. He explains how the human eye processes information and asks if she has a special organ, an evolution, a mutation, or the ability to see energy wavelengths. The boy whispers to the girl, saying something bad might happen if they take Woojin with them. The girl suddenly suggests they meet another time. Woojin, still curious, tells them not to leave and asks to talk more about ancestral spirits. However, the boy and girl quickly run away from him. Right after, Woojin notices a man recording him. The man laughs and says the video is complete. Woojin becomes curious, and the man introduces himself as Kiorite TV, a YouTuber. He explains that he was filming to expose scams and leave evidence, but he has never seen anyone react like Woojin before. He asks if he can use the video for a YouTube upload. Woojin refuses, saying it's not ordinary. The man questions what ordinary means and says he will blur Woojin's face. Still, Woojin insists that he delete the video. The man argues that videos like this should be widely shared for the public good. Woojin starts leaving, but the man offers to change his voice so no one can recognize him. Still, Woojin asks him to delete the video. The man then shouts that he will pay 500,000 won. Woojin remains firm, so the man increases the offer to 1 million won. At that moment, Woojin shows him his phone with his bank details. The man gets confused by how quickly Woojin's attitude changes, but transfers the money to his account. Later, Woojin meets Detective Taehyun at the restaurant. Taehyun asks him again what he wanted to eat. Woo Jin repeats that he wants two-horn number 9 Salchi Cell. Taehyun checks the price, and Woo Jin quickly says that something else is fine too. However, Taehyun insists that he will treat him, so they should eat what he wants. Then, Taehyun places the order. After placing the order, Taehyun thanks Woo Jin, saying they were almost too late to stop a serious incident. When they arrived at the scene earlier, there was chaos, and people were about to tear down a screen and jump out. Woo Jin responds that it's fortunate they arrived in time. The waitress brings the food, and both of them are amazed by how it looks. Woo Jin's mouth starts watering. The waitress serves them and tells them to try it first with just salt. Woo Jin takes his first bite and is overwhelmed by the taste. He shouts in surprise, and Taehyun watches him, confused. He asks if Woo Jin bit his tongue, but then Taehyun takes a bite himself and has the same reaction. He explains that the meat is incredibly delicious and worth the price. The meat juice surprises him. Taehyun tells Woo Jin to snap out of it before he eats everything. Woo Jin quickly takes another bite. The waitress continues serving them, and they both find the meal incredibly delicious. Taehyun then asks Woo Jin if they should order naengmyeon. Woo Jin responds that, as expected, the detective knows the golden rule. Taehyun reassures him that if the meat isn't enough, they can order more. Woo Jin hesitates but accepts. The next day, Woo Jin studies in his room. His mother serves him food, and he also helps his sister with her studies. He takes his classes and goes out with Hyrim to cafes and libraries, and life continues normally. Eventually, winter arrives. At school, everyone encourages the seniors, saying, "Good luck, and do well." Woo Jin looks up at the sky. He then enters the school to take his exam. Inside the classroom, he sits at his desk and receives the question paper. Looking at it, he decides to let's get started. Woo Jin finishes his exam and steps out of the school, feeling anxious. He worries that he has made an irreversible mistake. His parents have always told him that they only want him to stay healthy and that it is okay if he doesn't do well in his studies. They believe that living an ordinary life is the best. Taking a deep breath, he imagines his family welcoming him happily and telling him that he has worked hard. But now, he wonders what he should say when he gets home. As he reaches home and enters, Bomi runs toward him. Noticing his upset expression, she immediately asks why Woo Jin looks like that. When he doesn't answer, she starts to worry. She wonders if he might have messed up the test, but there is no way he could have made a mistake. Still, she asks again if something bad happened. Finally, Woo Jin speaks, saying that he thinks he overestimated himself. Bomi starts to think that maybe he was too nervous during the exam and made some mistakes. She tries to comfort him, saying that even if he did mess up a little, there will be other chances. Woo Jin doesn't respond much. Instead, he simply says he will go wash up, then heads to his room. Checking his phone, he sees a message from Hyrim asking how his test went, but he doesn't reply. He puts his phone on the table, thinking about how he solved too many practice problems unnecessarily. After that, he leaves his room, still looking depressed. Bomi watches him, feeling worried. She has never seen him like this before and doesn't know how to comfort him. Just then, their mother calls Bomi and asks if Woo Jin is home. Bomi hesitates and then tells her mother that he seems really down, probably because he didn't do as well as he thought on the test. Their father, overhearing the conversation, also becomes concerned and asks if Woo Jin is home. Their mother explains that he looks really disappointed, most likely because of his test results. Hearing this, their father becomes even more worried. He asks Bomi if Woo Jin said he did badly. Bomi responds that he didn't say much, but from his face, he seems extremely disappointed. Their father reassures her, saying that it is just one test, and these things happen. He tells her to remind Woo Jin that it is okay and not to be too upset. He then adds that he will be home soon with something delicious to cheer him up. Bomi agrees, and then turns back to her brother. Woo Jin comes out of the bathroom, and Bomi hesitantly asks if he is upset because he got a lot of questions wrong. She reminds him that these things can happen and reassures him that their parents will not be disappointed. But then, Woo Jin suddenly says something unexpected. He was not aiming to be extraordinary. Bomi, confused, asks what he means. Stressed, Woo Jin explains that he thinks he got everything right on the test. He says that he should have intentionally made some mistakes to be more ordinary. Bomi is stunned, realizing what he is saying. She asks again, trying to confirm. Woo Jin repeats that, without realizing it, he solved every problem correctly. Bomi feels her soul leaving her body. She cannot believe that this is the reason he is feeling down. Woo Jin then starts wondering if it is because he practiced too many problems. His hands moved on their own, answering questions without thinking. as if it were second nature. He worries that this is not normal. Bomi suddenly panics, rushing toward him and insisting that he cannot tell anyone about this. But Woojin, still deep in thought, concludes that it is just as he feared. He is not ordinary. Trying to calm him down, Bomi tells him that he might have made a few mistakes. She suggests checking his answers to make sure. Woojin sighs and says that would be nice. But then he admits something else. He remembers all of his answers. Bomi, shocked, asks if he really remembers each answer for each question. Without hesitation, Woojin confirms it, saying that they were problems he solved, so of course he remembers them. Now even more stunned, Bomi says that is not normal. Still, she insists that they should check, hoping that he got at least a few wrong. They begin checking his answers. Woojin simply says the question numbers and his answers. One by one, Bomi checks them. As she goes through each answer, she realizes they are all correct. Woojin, still hopeful, asks if there are any mistakes. But Bomi tells him that they are all correct. Determined to find even one mistake, she checks his answers in another subject, mathematics. Woojin anxiously asks her if any are wrong, pleading for at least one mistake. But when Bomi finishes checking, she hesitates and tells him everything is correct. Woojin falls into an even deeper depression. He says that he understands now. He really got everything right. Bomi, on the other hand, thinks that this is something to be happy about. She tells him that this is a great achievement and should be celebrated. But Woojin says that this is not what he wanted. He wanted to be ordinary, but being ordinary is harder than he thought. Their parents always told him to live a normal life, but now it seems impossible. Bomi realizes how their parents will react when they find out. She tells Woojin that they will be very surprised. Woojin agrees, saying that of course they will be surprised. He got a perfect score. Bomi realizes that her brother sees things in a completely different way than most people. Woojin, still emotional, says that he will never be ordinary. Now, Bomi starts getting annoyed. Just then, their parents arrive home. Bomi immediately runs to them and excitedly tells them the news. Woojin got a perfect score on the test. Their parents, initially confused, react with shock. Their mother, remembering how Bomi said he did badly, asks if this is really true. Bomi explains that they just finished checking all the answers and everything was correct. Their father, amazed, asks if Woojin really got a perfect score. After a brief moment, he smiles proudly and says that he finally understands Woojin must have taken after him. Hugging his son tightly, he praises him, saying that he has done well. But their mother immediately disagrees, saying that it is not from his father. Woojin takes after her. Hearing this, Bomi suddenly feels left out. She asks what about her, but before she can get an answer, the family continues to celebrate the shocking discovery of Woojin's perfect score. Filled with pride, Woojin's father calls everyone and tells them to gather the next day. He insists that he will treat everyone to a meal because of Woojin's achievement. He remarks that his son takes after him, calling him super smart. However, his mother gets angry and claims that Woojin got his intelligence from her. Meanwhile, Bomi watches them, enjoying their argument. Woojin feels uneasy. To him, it feels like his father is telling everyone that he is not ordinary. His father, still excited, starts listing possible career paths for his son. In his opinion, Woojin could become a doctor, a prosecutor, a lawyer, an appraiser, an accountant, or even a tax officer. His mother, now frustrated, scolds his father for putting pressure on their son. She tells him that Woojin should be free to choose whatever he wants to be. Then, turning to Woojin, she asks him which university he wants to attend. Woojin answers that he wants to go to a normal university. His response surprises everyone. They were expecting him to name a famous school, but instead, he just says he wants something normal. Bomi, curious, then asks which major he wants to study. Woojin replies that he has not decided yet. Later that night, sits in his room using his mobile phone. He begins researching different professions one by one. The first profession he looks up is an appraiser, prosecutors, and other officials. Then, he checks what a tax officer is. Next, he searches for information on architects. He continues looking into other professions like doctors and prosecutors, realizing that all the careers his father mentioned follow a pattern. They all operate within the legal or government framework. Curious, he decides to research famous people in these professions. He finds information on well-known individuals, including prosecutor Lee Jong-mi, Dr. Im Jae-jun, accountant Shim Dong-min, and lawyer Frank Soo-jin, and others. As he looks deeper, he notices most of these successful professionals graduated from the same university, S University. This makes him wonder if S University is considered the most normal. After that, Woojin leaves his room and announces his decision to his family. He declares that he will attend S University just like normal people do. His family gets shocked. They don't believe that S University is a normal school at all. His father, however, gets excited again. He agrees with Woojin, saying that if they are aiming for a normal university, then S University is the best choice. He even jokes that Harvard would be considered normal from Woojin's perspective. Days pass and winters arrive. Woojin's test results are released. With his plans set, he prepares for an important journey. He boards a high-speed train, carrying food in his bag. As he sits down, he takes out his meal and begins eating. He has always wanted to experience this moment. He cracks a boiled egg on his forehead before eating it and enjoys the simple but satisfying combination of food and soda. As he sips his drink, he understands that this is why people love eating on trains. It is an enjoyable experience. After finishing his meal, he gets off the train and continues his journey by bus. He eventually reaches his destination and approaches a counter to complete signing some paper. After completing the paperwork, a staff member guides him towards a room. As Woojin enters the room, he looks at the door and remembers a time when he was held captive. He recalls the harsh and cruel words of the person who imprisoned him. His captor once scolded him, saying that he was useless and could not even accomplish simple tasks. The officer takes Woojin to meet this captor. Sitting in front of each other, his captor looks at him and immediately reacts with disbelief. The man questions why Woojin has come to see him like this. Woojin remains silent, listening to his captor talk. The man remembers that Woojin cannot hear, assuming that he will not understand anything. But then, he recalls that Woojin can read lips. In Woojin's mind, there is no longer any fear toward this person. He feels nothing, but just emptiness. At that moment, he wonders if this is what true freedom feels like. In his memories, he sees himself standing in the warehouse where he was once held captive. His captor, now terrified, orders him to stop and go back inside. But Woojin steps closer, staring at the man, and realizes the roles have been reversed. The person who once held power is now trembling in fear. This is exactly what Woojin came to confirm. Returning to the present moment, his captor starts speaking again. The man insists that it was not his fault. He talks about his sister-in-law, saying that she had no real interest in medical herbs. He also reveals that she used to beat him with a stick. As he speaks, Woojin calmly responds. The prison uniform suits him. The man becomes furious. He is shocked that Woojin is speaking fluently, questioning if he can actually hear his words. Woojin points out that the man's voice is shaking. He reminds him that his family members died mysteriously one by one each year, some from heart attacks, others from poisoning. The man grows furious and wants to attack Woojin, but the officers quickly stop him. As Woojin watches his captor struggle, he reflects on human nature. He realizes that people only see what they want to see. They believe what they want to believe. They only listen to things that validate their existing thoughts. Looking at his captor, he remembers how the man used to beat others. Two of his former acquaintances, whom he abused, ended up dead. One suffered a heart attack. Woojin starts analyzing the details, his heartbeat increasing, his body reacting to fear. He wonders if he should push things further. As he stands there, observing the man who once tortured him, he ponders what to do next. Woojin says he has been struggling with a dilemma lately. He wonders if he should carve his release date onto his body so that he won't forget it. The man asks if he is threatening him, but Woojin quickly reassures him, saying that he is only concerned about his health. He asks if his captor is writing an autobiography and expresses curiosity about what it might say. The man, confused, asks how Woojin knows about that. Woojin continues, advising the accused to eat only when he is not full, to put down his phone before he feels satisfied, and to get some moderate exercise while avoiding too much sunlight. Woojin even mentions that he has deposited some money into the accused's prison account. He clarifies that he doesn't have much money yet as he isn't working, but he will send some from time to time. The accused starts to realize that Woojin's actions are part of a larger plan, a setup to keep him thinking about it constantly. He becomes agitated and panics, falling to the ground in fear. He shouts that Woojin is a murderer, accusing him of killing his family and neighbors. However, Woojin remains calm and thinks that this person has now become boring to him. An officer tells the man to calm down, but the accused insists that one of his lackeys is watching him. He says Woojin is the real culprit. Woojin finds the situation still somewhat interesting and decides to leave. After he comes back, Woojin lifts his hand to acknowledge the snow. He reflects how the snow can either bring joy or stress depending on a person's environment. He acknowledges how important the environment is, as it affects people in many ways. Even in this cold weather, he feels that he cannot take away the warmth people bring to each other. Soon, Woojin spots his sister Bomi with her friends. He decides to make a phone call to her and asks where she is heading. Bomi tells him she is on her way home. Woojin says he is standing right in front of her. Bomi, curious, asks him how he could be in front of her, but then she sees him waving. Excited, she runs toward him with a big smile, not even noticing how slippery the ground is. Woojin thinks that, like falling snowflakes, Bomi is running toward him with pure joy. She only looks at him and doesn't care about the slippery floor. He realizes how much a person's environment can shape their happiness. As Bomi reaches him, she gives him a hug and asks where he has come from. Woojin explains that he went to see someone he knew, someone he doesn't need to see anymore. Meanwhile, Bomi's friends are surprised to see her brother in person, noting how he looks more handsome in person. Woojin then takes something out of his bag and offers it to Bomi, telling her to try it. Bomi asks what it is, and Woojin tells her it is takoyaki, a snack he thinks is really delicious. He tells her that he wrapped it up carefully so it won't get cold. Bomi is touched and asks if the snack is just for her. Woojin confirms and encourages her to try it, saying it is really tasty. Some days pass. Woojin gets off a bus and walks down the road to reach his university. He notices something on a notice board. He checks the details of an event and thinks that the real purpose of the event is clear. There's no such thing as a free lunch. After that, he enters a lecture hall and looks for his seat. As he sits in the middle, he reflects on how ordinary that is. Sitting in the middle is the most normal thing to do. Soon, a boy approaches him and introduces himself as Park Jong-wook. Woojin recognizes the name from the freshman group chat. He smiles and greets Park Jong-wook, assuring him they will get along and not fight. Park Jong-wook laughs, commenting on how Woojin sounds like a textbook. He then asks if Woojin knows about the gathering after class. Woojin confirms that he does. As more students arrive, the classroom becomes crowded. Woojin is excited. This is his first university lecture, something he's always wanted to experience. The teacher walks in, greets everyone, and introduces himself as the professor for the Introduction to Business course. He asks the class what they think business is and invites the students to raise their hand to answer. The room is silent, so Woojin thinks to himself that raising his hand would be the normal thing to do. The teacher picks a student who seems nervous. The student answers that business is about leading a company. The teacher acknowledges this and asks another student in a white shirt for their answer. The student suggests that business is about managing and operating a business. The teacher agrees, calling it a valid answer. The teacher then asks what qualities a business leader should have. A student sitting at the back answers that they should be good at planning and giving directions. The teacher praises this answer and turns to the next student. Woojin wonders if he's been called on because he's sitting in the middle. Since he's been picked, he decides to answer. He says that business leaders should be good at persuasion. The teacher, curious, asks Woojin to explain what he means by persuasion. Woojin begins to think about stock trading and uses it as an example. He explains how a securities company holds stock trading competitions, offering prize money to participants. Many people are enticed by the prize and take part, but the company is also using the competition to identify skilled traders. The winners may be recruited by the company, creating a connection through scholarships and incentives. Woojin further elaborates on how advertisements can manipulate people, drawing them into a state where they're more likely to make decisions based on persuasion. He believes that business leaders understand this power and use it in various ways. Marketing is one way to apply persuasion, but at its core, society itself is built on persuasion. The teacher and the entire class listen attentively to his explanation. After a moment, Woojin raises his hand again, asking when the actual lecture will begin. He thinks that he just wants to take a normal class and experience the university like everyone else.